All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a truly fascinating piece of ancient cartography. We're going to explore an ancient text that blends physical geography with deep spiritual symbolism to literally map out the cosmos. Now, this isn't the kind of map you'd use to navigate a road trip or, sail across a known ocean. Instead, it's an attempt to map the very structure of reality exactly as the ancients understood it.
So ask yourself this: how exactly do you map a world where time stands still? I love that question. It's this bizarre, almost hauntingly beautiful concept from our source material, and it perfectly sets the stage for the spatial journey we're about to take. You see, we're dealing with an ancient worldview that didn't just stop at mapping physical dirt, stone, and water. No, they were actively trying to map time, eternity, and the divine forces of the universe right alongside their physical environment.
To really grasp our source material, we first need to ground ourselves in what it actually means to map the unmappable. And that brings us to the term cosmography. What is it? Well, it's the science, or honestly, in this ancient context, the mystical practice of mapping the general features of the cosmos, the entire universe. Think of it as cartography on the grandest possible scale.
So here's our agenda for today's map. First, mapping the ancient cosmos. Second, the four celestial winds. Third, mountains beyond time. Fourth, 7 rivers and islands. And finally, reading the celestial map.
Let's kick things off with Part 1, Mapping the Ancient Cosmos, a conceptual overview.
We're beginning our cartographer's journey by establishing the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the universe described in our text. This is really about stepping out of our modern, satellite-mapped minds for a second and stepping into a world that's governed by mythic proportions. We're going to be drawing entirely from this one specific ancient source text, the cosmography of the 7 winds and mountains, to build a vivid mental map piece by piece. The authors of this text, they were looking at the world around them and trying to organize it in a way that made sense of both the natural elements they fought to survive against and the spiritual realms they believed completely governed them.
Moving on to Part 2, the 4 celestial winds, setting the compass.
Okay, before you can place your mountains or your rivers, you obviously need to know which way is up, down, left, and right. But notice how these cardinal directions aren't just your standard coordinates on a grid. They're defined by divine actions and the cosmic movement of heavenly bodies. Take a look at the east. They literally just call it the first, simply because it's the starting point, which makes sense, right? It's likely where the sun rises. But then, look at the south. It isn't defined by some mountain range or a sea, it's defined by a spectacular divine event. It is where the Most High, the Blessed One in eternity, actually descends. Moving over to the west, it gets the name the diminishing because this is where the luminaries of the heavens, the sun and the stars, diminish and physically go down. So we're looking at a map based entirely on celestial behavior. And then, well, there's the north, which is incredibly unique.
Our text actually explicitly divides the north wind into 3 very distinct parts. Imagine a pie chart where exactly 1/3 is designated for the dwelling of men, so human civilization. Another third is set aside for the untamed physical world. We're talking seas, valleys, woods, streams, darkness, and fog. But here's the kicker. The final third is strictly reserved for the garden of justice. So you have humanity, untamed nature, and moral destinations all existing side by side within the very wind itself. It just goes to show us that in this cosmography, geography and morality are completely, inextricably intertwined.
That brings us to Part 3, Mountains Beyond Time, the Towering Landmarks.
So, with our directional bearings set by the sky and the winds, we're now dropping down to Earth to examine its terrifyingly beautiful landmarks. We are moving from the invisible forces of the air right into the heaviest, most immovable objects you could possibly imagine. And the absolutely crucial point here is the recurring powerful presence of the number 7 in this geography, starting with 7 immense mountains. Now you might know that in ancient numerology, 7 frequently represents completeness, or divine perfection. So this isn't just a random count of peaks. It tells us that these geological features are absolutely foundational to the perfect order of the universe.
And let's be clear, these are not your standard geographical features. The text specifically emphasizes that these 7 peaks dwarf any mountain known to human experience. They are explicitly described as being, quote, higher than all the mountains which are on the earth. The cartographer really wants us to imagine a scale that totally breaks the boundaries of human exploration.
We actually need to just pause for a second and let the chilling weight of this poetic observation really sink in. The text says, from these towering mountains comes hoarfrost, but then it adds something much more profound. and days and times and years cease and depart. I mean, wow. These are landmarks where time literally ceases to exist. Just imagine trying to draw a map where a specific mountain range marks the absolute end of linear time. It is a breathtaking concept. The physical height of the mountains somehow breaches the atmosphere of time itself, thrusting the peaks up into pure eternity.
All right, on to part 4, 7 rivers and islands, the vital waterways. Having drawn our timeless mountains, we now get to fill in the lifeblood of the map, the waterways and landmasses that divide up the world. And much like those mountains we just talked about, these 7 rivers operate on an incomprehensibly colossal scale. The text casually notes they are larger than all the rivers. So that pattern of 7 continues, laying down a perfectly ordered, perfect network of vital waterways across the Earth.
This breakdown traces the complex, overarching logistics of exactly how these massive rivers route across the ancient cartographers' world. Pay close attention to the flow here. You've got one river coming from the west that empties into the Great Sea. Then we have this massive influx from the north. 2 rivers come from the north to empty into the Erythraean Sea over in the east. The remaining 4, they also come from the north, but they cross over, 2 of them joining the Erythraean Sea and 2 emptying into the Great Sea, although the text does note that some people say they actually empty into the desert. What's so fascinating here is the precise accounting of it all. The author is deeply, deeply concerned with the exact routing of these cosmic waters, anchoring this whole mystical narrative with some very rigid geographical logistics.
And to finally complete the physical geography, the text reveals 7 massive islands scattered across this mapped world. But notice the distribution here, because it's a bit strange. 2 of these great islands are somehow situated on the land, while the other 5 are out in the Great Sea. Now, the inclusion of islands on the land is a really curious phrase. It's perhaps indicating these massive, isolated plateau regions or oases that felt like islands amidst a totally impassable landscape. But again, the main takeaway is that everything is operating in these perfect sets of 7.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Reading the Celestial Map, Finding Our Place.
So, let's take a step back from our finished map for a minute to examine what this cartographic journey ultimately represents. We've charted the 4 winds, the 7 timeless mountains, the 7 giant rivers, and the 7 islands. But what does it actually all mean when we put it together? Well, notice how seamlessly this ancient map blends literal earthly features with these deeply mystical and theological realities. On one side, we have highly recognizable physical geography, right? Valleys, woods, streams, fog, and massive oceans. But then, occupying the exact same map, on the exact same plane of reality, we have the Most High descending in the south, a garden of justice hidden inside the north wind, and mountains that are so high that time itself literally freezes at their peaks. For the ancients, you see, the physical and the spiritual were not separate realms at all. They were overlaid on the exact same map. To walk through the physical world was, in every sense, to navigate a deeply spiritual landscape.
And that leaves us with this really fascinating thought to end on today. If our modern maps simply show us where we are physically, what do ancient maps tell us about who we were fundamentally? Humanity has always tried to map out the vast, overwhelming universe just to try and understand our own tiny place within it. But this text, it reminds us that sometimes the absolute most important things to map aren't just the rivers and the mountains, but our relationship to time, morality, and the cosmos itself. Definitely something to think about the next time you pull up a map on your phone. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.